There would be few companies in Australia that would not be eyeing off China at the moment, either as a market opportunity or indeed as an incubator of budding future competitors. My guest tonight has spent many years in the Chinese business world, and his new book, The China Strategy, describes how to build the capabilities that business leaders need for operating an integrated China global strategy. Dr. Edward Tsay is Booz & Company's chairman of Greater China, and I spoke to him a short time ago. Dr. Tsay, welcome to Late Line Business.
Thank you for your invitation.
China today, the slowdown that we see and all the talk about the problems with Europe, how do you analyse this?
Well, I think when you talk about stock, slowdown, you're comparing, with the 11% growth in the first quarter of this year. I think in the second quarter, China is looking at about 10% growth, which is by any measurement is still pretty high. Indeed, it's a little bit of a slowdown from the 11% in the first quarter. In my opinion, this is good for China because we have had quite a bit of concern about inflation, about some of the issue with the property prices and so on. Perhaps a little bit of overheating and a bit of a slowdown is actually probably good for China.
Let's move on to your ideas behind a new China strategy. You talk about a one world strategy. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, when I say one world, I mean increasingly for global companies or for so-called multinational companies, they need to consider China not only as a, interesting market, a marginal market where you just send a beachhead team there to tap your foot into the water and test whether the water is cold or dry or warm. Or just treat China as a, let's say, a sourcing base to source the product and send them back to the home countries. Increasingly, global companies find that they need to treat China, when they consider the global strategies, they need to treat China as an integrated and core part of the global strategies.
Looking at the big multinationals, thinking of the Farnborough Air Show the other day, and Boeing and Airbus, they have been the sellers of their products, and presumably in China now there are going to be competitors that are they're going to be building their own planes. I mean, the Boeings and Airbuses of this world are going to have some major competitors from China.
Well, exactly. That's what China is. China can really present a bit of a challenge for companies like Boeing and Airbus. It is indeed a major strategic question. How should they consider China both as a customer, in fact, a huge customer, and also a potential and upcoming competitor is a pretty large challenge for these companies.
Now, I presume there'll be a lot of our viewers who are unfamiliar with the names of the budding global multinationals of the future from China. Can you mention a few likely names?
Well, in fact, the China already have had a handful of pretty successful global multinationals, and I think companies such as Li Ning. Li Ning is the name of a gymnast in China who represented China in the Los Angeles and the Seoul Olympics, and very, very successful. And then later on, he created his own sportswear company, and using his name as a brand. And today, Li Ning is a bona fide leading competitor in the sportswear market in China, and they are already taking the first step in expanding outside of China. So in due course, we're probably going to see Li Ning become even more prominent around the world.
So how does an Australian company look at China and develop a strategy? What are the sort of issues that it should be looking at?
Well, it really depends on what industry that you're in. But in addition to the resources sector, China has a diverse set of industry sectors where there's tremendous demand, both from the standpoint of exporting the products and services from China to outside of China, and also in terms of a quick development of the domestic market in China. And so to that end, I think I would advise that for Australian companies, based on which industry they are in, they should really study China both as a potential market, also potential customers, and as well as China's role in the rest of the world for Australian company. To what extent a presence in China can actually help Australian company to strengthen the position in the rest of the world.
We often hear about the lure of 1.3 billion people, but more than size, you talk about China's intensity, this ferocious entrepreneurial energy. What drives this?
Historically, the Chinese are good entrepreneurs. Historically, for thousands of years, Chinese in our blood, we are good businessmen, we're good tradesmen. But then all of that was suppressed when the Communist Party took over in 1949, and then all the way up to the Cultural Revolution in the 70s. And the Cultural Revolution to the Chinese was a disaster. But the Cultural Revolution also did one thing. It's kind of like a dam. Huh? We dam all the water, and then once that dam was sort of released, the water was built up and then it flows down.
So there's this need to be back on top as number one.
Exactly. This entrepreneurism was released, and then, I think people are seeing the result of releasing of this entrepreneurism, and there's a lot of momentum that's been developed.
Just a couple of last ones. Let me ask you, how seriously will China be grappling with some of its internal problems? I'm thinking of the environment, presumably labour issues, an ageing population.
Well, these are indeed serious issues to the Chinese, and the Chinese government, together with the Chinese people, actually do recognize the importance of this kind of issues. On the environment issues, this is already a top priority for the Chinese government as well as the Chinese people. It's very clear that the Chinese would like to develop a much more sustainable basis for further growth. In the past, China has gone through a period where economic growth was the only objective at the expense of everything else, including environment. Going forward, sustainability is going to be the key. On issues such as labor costs and on aging, these are also fundamental problems that are very profound. On labor costs, I think the Chinese government did recognize that this is a problem, and that, in fact, this is also a turning point to the Chinese model. On aging, it's also a big problem, largely because of the one-child policy. The Chinese is becoming an aging population very fast, and so the Chinese government is now considering different measures on how to improve the situation.
Finally, what should we make of official China? Will the Chinese government still keep control of certain sectors?
By definition, they will. The Chinese, as I mentioned in my book, the Chinese government actually has been liberalizing many sectors over the last couple of decades, gradually, one by one. But there are still some sectors that Chinese government will probably still put a heavy hand on.
Including media.
Like the media and telecom operations.
Dr. Tsai, I thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.